Oh, I can hear Josh, but yeah, I'll just relay to me.
Start from this side. Keep it same. Okay. That's fine.
Is it working now? Blah blah. Meridad, is this working? 1, 2, 3, 4.
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, I could talk to Trevor apparently.
Nice.
Should I keep talking? You guys good or?
We are good. I mean, whenever it's the sound company.
Do they have a microphone for people in the audience?
No, but we have an extra mic here, so maybe when we could pass it around because you can't hear the background.
Well, not really. It sounds like the Charlie Brown adults, like, so I can't really tell.
Well, if someone has a question, I could give them the mic.
All right.
And we will be starting the similar series by SDSA. Our first speakers will be Dr. Trever Harris. He's from he's an assistant professor at AMN, and we'll be talking George. He's also be joining in Florida State University and as an assistant professor in fall 2022. Please welcome Trever and George for this speech.
So this will be a panel style discussion where.
Oh, hold on one second. Yeah. Can you hear Saya and Trevor?
A little bit, but I didn't hear the clapping.
You might need to grab the mic.
Yeah. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yeah, I can hear you pretty good now.
Okay, so this will be a panel style discussion where we'll have some topics on job search, and Josh and Trevor will talk about their experience within those topics. And after each topic, we'll have some short Q&A. You can ask some short questions. And at the end, we'll have a long Q&A session for 10 minutes where you can answer like long questions. So we'll just get started. So could you please share the screens? Okay, I'll just go sit. So could you just go to that? So first we'll talk about job posting. So how do you know that there's an opening for a job? So how do you find the job listings up?
Yeah. First, I just want to ask how many people in the audience are like interested or like considering, academic jobs, just out of curiosity, not like, oh, I'm going to do it, but have it on their radar possibly. Okay.
There we go. More hands.
Yeah. Just, consider, because I just want to say this is good stuff to know. Like, you should be thinking about this throughout the PhD because it all goes into your CV. So it's not something you should be doing like right before. So it'll help out. So maybe, yeah.
So, no, I was just agreeing. I was just saying, yeah, it's true. Like you should be thinking about this, sort of well in advance. And of course, you're not really going to know the answer probably until that fall of your 5th year when you start applying, but you should be thinking about that ahead of time and then try to prepare for what you're going to do. So as for job postings, well, of course, every university is going to have their own job board. They may be through Interfolio or they may be on Math Jobs, but every university will have its own posting and they'll sort of make an announcement about it. Sort of the best aggregator for finding it is University of Florida has a job board where pretty much everyone just pays to put their job on there. And I think that's where like 90% of all the jobs will just be posted like on that University of Florida board. So that's mostly what I monitored. But then on University of Washington also has one, but it's sort of redundant with the Florida one. Math Jobs will have some, especially if you're interested in jobs like in Asia or in Europe, then they'll be there more so. Also, your advisor will tell you about positions because the head of departments will contact each other and say like, hey, send me your good students. Or just any.
I actually monitored 3 job boards. So as you said, there's the Florida one, but I think the official ones are, as you said, mathjobs.org.
Yeah.
And you'll apply through there too for some jobs. You'll see mostly like if it's a math and stat department, not just a stat department, a lot of them will post in math jobs. The ASA has a job board that most of the big stat departments will post in. So I definitely monitor that. And the IMS also has a job board that you should monitor as well. And last year, and it wasn't for you, but it's been very convenient for me, was the ASA recently has a new like job board forum or job posting forum. So you know how you could join like the ASA discussion on like data science,
right?
Job postings now. And so everyone used to cross post all over, like a department be like, oh, we're hiring for statistics, and they cross post in like all the different ASA forums. But now there's just a job posting forum that has all of them that I definitely look into. And usually they'll start posting these jobs. I started, I think, making a spreadsheet of job postings, I want to say in August, maybe early, end of July, you'll start to see postings pop up. And so as soon as that happens, you should probably make like an Excel spreadsheet just with, the job posting and information about it. And just pulling that out because deadlines usually start in mid-October is when there'll be deadlines to submit the applications.
Right. So they'll start being due in mid-October, but then some of them will be due all the way through like early January or so. It just depends on how fast the department's able to secure positions. So departments, they can't just have a position every year. They have to ask the college if they can have a position. And usually there's a big waiting time. So yeah, you'll see quite a range, but probably the last ones will be due in about January or so.
And for example, Ohio State this year, I think, had a posting that opened up in like end of January.
Oh, wow.
Very late. They got very late approval. Same with, I think, one of the University of California schools, which is actually to some people's benefit because they have a smaller job pool to pull from. So if you get selected, like you have a decent shot because all the good candidates are getting swiped up.
Right. That's true. Also, even if it says a deadline, there'll usually be something that says to the effect of people who submit after this will still be given full consideration. And now having experience with one department, that actually is very true. They usually will start by making a short list of about 20 people, and that's going to be from the first batch that applied. But then when they go and revise those short lists as people come and interview and then decline the offer, they'll start pulling even from the new applicants. So even if you do miss a deadline, which I don't recommend doing, you're not actually hosed for that department. Like you can actually still apply and you'll still be fully considered. And so they don't really care about when people applied so much. That's just more of we want to start interviewing early. Like most places will try to start interviewing late in the fall around December or so.
right? And I guess moving on to how to respond, I think Trevor mentioned it briefly. There's two, like either they have their own specific site for the university was created in the 90s and they're going to use, but more often they'll be through Interfolio, which is this kind of just aggregate system to upload documents and stuff like that. So a good chunk are through Interfolio. You'll make an account. It's very convenient for your letter writers too. They upload their letters to Interfolio. And then Math Jobs is another that has like, you create a profile and you just do it all through there. So it's very convenient for those two. And one thing I noticed very late in the process, and I wish I had known beforehand, some Interfolio could even, so one thing that you'll notice when doing this job search is getting the letter writers to get their letters to the universities, right? Usually it's not really a big deal because it really only matters once you get to the final like interviews, they want to get them finally. But I noticed that one thing that was annoying for these old websites, you'd have to I thought you had to get your letter writers to do it again for the old websites, but some of them you could actually just get Interfolio to forward it from there, which was convenient. For example, I had Doug Simpson writing a reference and he's very busy. And so he put it off, so it was good being able to do it for them.
Yeah.
Job postings, they include postdocs as well.
Yeah, so Anamitra asked if the job posting include postdocs. And they include postdocs, but a lot of postdocs actually just aren't posted.
Right.
And Trevor might know more. A lot of times it's just the PI gets grant funding for a postdoc. And you should talk to your, Flores. He'll probably know people say, hey, I have a student. Do you have money for a postdoc? And they'll say yes or no. The ones that are posted, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. It's hard to tell with the latency.
Yeah, the ones that are posted, I mean, there are ones posted on the forums, but they're I saw a lot of assistant professors and early associate professors occasionally because they get big grants and they were just looking. I rarely saw full professors, which is who you want a postdoc for, famous people post on those forums.
Right. Yeah. And so postdoc, like Josh is saying, probably the vast majority of them are never posted publicly anywhere. It really is just through your advisor, just recommending you to somebody and sort of just talking to them. That'll typically happen about the middle of the spring is when people start looking because, that's people who maybe didn't get an academic job or maybe decided they're not ready to go for an academic job yet, so they didn't look. I think that if you're interested in doing an academic job, you should apply and interview and everything like that. And then afterwards you should start looking for a postdoc. But I think you should at least, statistics is still very good in the sense that you can still get full jobs as me and Josh did without having to do a postdoc necessarily. So it's good to try the market and then try for a postdoc.
And you also get a feel for maybe where you're lacking, while you're going through the process. So it was actually helpful.
Right.
The one exception I think to the postdoc post is there'll be named postdocs, like Harvard has a fellowship. I think Penn State has a fellowship, which I think Shulai did.
Stanford's got one. Yeah.
Stanford's got one. Those will have job postings, obviously. I applied and it got pretty far on one for Notre Dame. So there's big named ones that have really good funding, that are posted, but individual PIs usually aren't.
Right. Yeah. The named ones that are run like that, those are very good. Those would be very helpful for you. So even if you can get a good job now, you can come out from one of those and probably get an even better one, or at least have a way better contacts and collaborators after something like that.
One question. So, your experience is only about the statistics department, right? So if you have any other experience for applying business school or other departments, decision sciences, computer science, something, are they different or no?
So I could speak to, so I applied to math and stat departments, statistics departments, and some business schools. So I have experience with them. I didn't apply to any computer science because that gets a little different. I mean, you could try, but and one of the business ones, the stat department was in the decision sciences. So, and they're slightly different. The application process was pretty similar. I mean, as we've mentioned, if it's a more math oriented field, they'll be on math jobs usually. I should mention another one, which is very rarely you'll use, but there was a few postings, was academic jobs is another one.
Oh yeah.
And so they're slightly different, and it comes more into how you interview for them, what you want to focus on when you're talking to people for business school is going to be different than like a statistics. And for like, if it's not like a main statistics department, you'll be having to justify a little bit more how you could collaborate with mathematicians or, people working in finance or management and stuff. So it does change it a little bit. But the application portion was pretty similar.
You also want to think pretty hard about whether you want to go to these departments or not. So there's pros and cons, but some of the cons can really be, especially if you're in a math stat department, is that the stats groups is usually smaller and in some sense weaker than the math group because they're usually a lot bigger and have been around for a while. So you are going to be a little bit of a second-class citizen often if you're in a math department. Also, the amount of funding you get is also going to be less as well. For biostat departments, that's another option as well. Like if you do a lot of actual biostatistics or you want to collaborate with hospitals, those can be really good, but you need to know those are pretty much all soft money, which means everything's going to be funded through grants rather than through a fixed salary as much. So with business schools, I think you just get paid a lot more, but the requirements for tenure are a little bit different.
Yeah, that's the thing actually. Like when you're interviewing there, you have to figure out what their requirements for tenure are. Like, so the public, like especially in a math and stat, you have to make sure the chair and others know what the good stat journals are.
Right.
Like some don't even know like JASA, so you have to be like, sometimes the math people they want you to be a mathematician. You want to be, they just like annals and like, that's it. You know what I mean? So you got to be very careful. And then for business schools, like business schools are actually much easier. A lot of the business schools have like, here's how we rank the journals. You need to publish in this many tier journals to get tenure. Like I interviewed at Baruch College, which is a business school in New York City. And that's what they had. They're like, here's our A-list journals. You need to publish like 3 A-list publications, and then you'll probably get tenure. So that's your main difference is your expectations for tenure change depending on the type of department.
Yeah, for sure.
That was good information. So we'll just move on to the next topic now.
Yeah.
Sorry, actually, I have one more question. Interfolio, is there a freemium kind of model? I just heard, like, does it cost in any way, like, to send recommendations? I just heard about this.
I mean, there's definitely a paid component. I don't remember if I paid for like the premium, like the part, like to just do the application, it's free.
That's great. Okay, got it.
I forgot
What was the
what
question?
for Interfolio, he asked like he like there's a there's a paid option, and I don't remember what that gets you. I know to apply, you don't need to pay, but maybe to send the letters you did. I don't remember.
I don't remember paying anything.
I don't remember paying either. I don't think you need to pay for anything major. Yeah.
So the next topic is what documents do you need for application? So here's the list that Josh sent me yesterday. And I think you can also talk about letters of recommendation. So.
Yeah, that's actually the most important component, I think, is your letters of recommendation. So when I was sitting on meetings, faculty meetings where we were reviewing candidates to bring in an interview, they would often list a few attributes that essentially they summarized from these statements. And what they would do is they would pull out like, do you have any top publications? It's more of a yes or no. It's not like you have 3 JASAs versus 1 JASA. Like they're still like, oh, okay, this person can write good papers. So that wasn't so important, but usually they would try to pull out the information of like, you have good publications, but then everything else is based almost entirely on the letters of recommendation. So if your advisor can write you a very strong letter, especially if they can say something like you are, one of their best students and you do amazing work and you have really good collaborations, then like that's actually one of the most important things. So these are all good. You have to have all these done, but unfortunately the most important component is something that's a little bit out of your control, which is the letters.
That's why it's good to think about this early, because that's why collaboration is useful. If you could get a few, you need usually 3 to 4 letters of recommendation. Actually, that distinguishes some math and stat departments. Most stat needs 3 letters. Some math will need 4, and usually that 4th letter is because one needs to be specifically about your teaching, or not specifically, but has to have a component about your teaching. But yeah, I've never been on the other end, but just because they're so important, like it was beneficial. I had 2 advisors, Roaching and Hugo, so I could get 2 people who really knew me very well. And usually like the other letter, just to that process, the other letters of recognition will typically be who's on your committee, right? Like, you know, my letters of recognition from everyone on my prelim committee. You know, I just got them to do letters as well. So.
Yeah. As for the CV, of course, this is, you know, your standard academic CV style. There's a lot of guides online, but, you know, you'll see other professors have theirs posted so you can get an idea of what that's supposed to look like. If you're not sure, I can just send you mine, of course, and I'm not going to say it's like the best CV ever, but at least that's the right format. You sort of, you know, you want that to be, you know, you follow, have all the information they have on there. You want to, of course, emphasize like, you know, your publications and like talks you've given and things like that, and have all the sort of minor stuff, you know, at the bottom. But you want this to be like as clean and as nice as possible. So that's, you know, something that unconsciously weighs on people, right? If they look at your documents and it's a big sloppy mess, then what does that sort of say about you? So I think sort of the presentation of these can be important, especially for the CV.
Yeah.
There's not much to say on like with the content of the CV, I guess, because it's sort of like standardized in terms of like, you know, your education, like, you know, what's your PhD, what was it in, you know, what was your thesis about, like what topics you're interested in, like what papers have you published, like what's in submission. You can put things like you have papers under review, like that's okay. They're not really going to count it for like, you know, what have you published, but it's good to show that like you're still working on things, especially if it's a little bit different than, you know, maybe what you've been working on with your advisor. Because what they're really looking for in all these, you know, your research statement and your CV is, do you work independently, or are you like, you know, your advisor's little minion, right? Like, are you thinking for yourself and doing your own projects, or are you just doing whatever your advisor said? Because if it looks like, whether it's true or not, if it looks like you're just sort of following your advisor, they'll be very skeptical of whether you're going to be able to do research on your own. Whether that's fair or not, you know, who's to say, but that's sort of what it's going to look like. So for the CV and especially for the research statement, that's where you have a chance to talk about yourself. Like you need to emphasize like your independence on these sort of things. And that'll actually mean a lot.
Yeah, I think that covers it. I mean, I will say for documents, the graduate college has this, was it academic job week that they put on every, I think twice a year, but there's one in, I think it was in July, which was very useful because they'll sit down and you'll go over how to write a CV, how to write a research statement, teaching statement. They give you slides. I'd really recommend it for like this kind of thing. And then, you know, that's generic, and then going to your advisor and getting it a little more for like statistics.
Yeah, definitely ask your advisor to review the documents with you. Because you don't, what you can really do at this stage for like the research statement, the teaching statement, the diversity one is like, they're not going to help you that much, but they can hurt you if you mess them up. It's the letters that'll really sell you, and like what sort of publications and stuff you have.
But I will add, these are useful for yourself when you're interviewing, because a lot of the questions you'll get from people are related, like, tell me about what's your research vision, you know, what research do you plan doing on the future, and all that kind of stuff. Like, you should think about like, how do I make that like very succinct and coherent? Like, what is my vision of research in the future? Like, it shouldn't be, oh, I worked on this project and then my advisor told me to work on this one. There should be like a clear, like, I don't want to say grand, like, it doesn't need to be like, oh, you know, super grand, but there has to be some coherence to it too, because, you know, there are people, and maybe Trevor probably knows more, but you need to start thinking like, how can I start get grant funding? Like, what is like, you know, how is this going to become, you know, a research package that I'm going to now apply for grants and stuff like that, you know, and that's kind of part of it too.
Right.
And then teaching is useful because people will ask your teaching philosophy, you know, and the teaching statement's very simple. It's just, what is your teaching philosophy? It's a few bullet points of important stuff for teaching. You know, then, for example, I just listed, here's what I've taught, and then, you know, examples of my teaching philosophy and practice, you know, and, you know, that usually go on.
Right. And if you're not really sure what to put on a teaching statement, like that's not the most important document. So it's sort of okay if it's not like the best thing you've ever written. Okay. But, you know, you can just be thinking about like what classes you took. Like, even if you haven't TA'd a ton, or, you know, you haven't really taught any classes, you can think about classes that you took and things that you like from them, and then sort of incorporate that into your philosophy. So like, for instance, if you've taken, Floris's measure theory and you're like, wow, I really like assigning a lot of homework, you can talk about, the importance of, like assigning lots of work and, instilling, through practice in students and things like that. It's probably not a good example of what to put, but you can just sort of think about the classes you took and then the aspects that you liked and sort of form a philosophy on that. Because I certainly didn't have a teaching philosophy before I started writing this document.
All right, I think Simon wants to move on.
We have to move on to the next topic. So I'll just. The next one is on interviews. So did you have remote interviews or in-person interviews?
So I should mention, so how the interviews work, it's a mix. Usually, a lot of places now are moved to a screening interview and then a final interview. It used to just be one interview, but now because of Zoom and everything, there's a lot of screening interviews now. And so for all the screening interviews are obviously remote, right, over Zoom, and they're very short. They're like maybe 15 minutes, 30 minutes max. And you just meet with either the full search committee, which is, 5 people at most. It could be more, but usually 5 people, or just one person, the head of the search committee. And it's very brief. The questions are usually, explain your research to me. Why are you interested in joining the department? Do you have any questions? That's usually, maybe talk about some teaching, in my experience, that's usually, you could always count on those questions. And you need to be succinct, they're scheduled for 15 minutes. You shouldn't go over 15 minutes, you want to leave time for questions. So that's why it's important to have a good idea of like, this is my research in a few sentences, and just get it out there. Don't just ramble on, so because you want to get to questions, because questions, one thing, at least in my experience from this interviews, was people also want to know, was I interested in, like if they gave me an offer, would I accept it, or was I going to just, keep the offer and then reject it, and then they'd have to, lose out on candidates. So, the part where you're asking questions is very important to like show your interest, right? At least that's what I kind of used it for, partly.
That is true.
Right. So that's the screening. I don't know if you want to say anything more.
I sort of just concur with all that. I just want to make sure everyone understands when they say, do you have questions? The answer is always yes. You always have questions. You better ask some questions, because in fact, when you get to the interviews themselves, they're usually just going to say, do you have any questions when you do the full ones? But for the screening ones, like you definitely want to show your interest. Like that's actually why they're doing it. The screening can actually help you a lot, even though it's annoying. They have to do 2 things, but the screening is a chance for them to find out who's actually interested in coming. That's what it's more so trying to gauge. Like if they got to the screening phase, and that means they think they could bring you on for an interview. Like they're not trying to weed you out so much on like, what have you done and everything. They're trying to weed you out on like, are you actually interested in coming, or should we waste thousands of dollars flying you out here?
Yeah, and then for the remote or in person, for my year was a mix, because we started out in person, and then once Omicron hit, it was all remote afterward. So I had, for final interviews, I had 2 in person, and then the remaining were remote. And they're all pretty similar. I mean, the in-person ones like are much funner of an interview. The remote ones are exhausting, because you're sitting in front of you for, literally from some of them, those interviews would last the whole day. So I'd get up at like 8 and interview all the way until like 6 o'clock in the afternoon, with 10-minute breaks in between if I was lucky. A lot of times it was interview to interview. They're exhausting. Right. I could talk a little bit.
All of mine were remote. So because I was during the pandemic year, or the worst pandemic year, I suppose. So I didn't have any in person, but I think the in-person ones, which I've now attended on the other side, those look super exhausting. But usually the way that's going to work is you're going to meet with individual faculty, or you may meet with 1 or 2 at a time, and it's going to be a very open discussion. Like they're not going to ask you like, state the assumptions of linear regression, or like, what's spectral clustering. Like they're not trying to do that. They're going to ask you about your research, and they're going to see, whether you can talk about research on your own, whether you have ideas. Like, do you seem like someone who could actually work as a professor and as a colleague to them? and are you interested? They always want to know like if you are interested or not, because they can only send out so many offers at a time. So like they don't want to give you an offer unless they have some strong suspicion that you will take it, because then it wastes their time. But usually it's just one day of interview. So like after that, you'll have they'll meet the week afterwards and then figure out if they're going to give you an offer or not.
Yeah. So like just to paint the picture of the day is usually, as you said, you'll get there, you'll have breakfast, they'll take you to the department, you'll have one-on-one or, maybe two-on-one meetings scheduled throughout the day. Usually you'll have lunch. The ones that I did in person, one of them a lot of times you'll have lunch actually with graduate students, is how some of them do it. So you can meet the graduate students there, but sometimes it's with faculty. But the ones I did in person were with graduate students. And then they'll take you around campus, either for when I did it with an emeritus professor or graduate students will take you around campus. And then you'll meet with more people. And usually at the end of the day is when you give your job talk. And so that's something to remember, is this job talk you're giving at the end of the day when you're exhausted and you just want to go to bed, so that's, we haven't talked much about it, and Trevor could maybe talk a little bit more about the importance of it in the interview, but in my understanding, this was a pretty important component, and one that you should prepare for a lot, and because it's at the end of the day, you should kind of be able to do it on autopilot, because like you're going to be exhausted, and so you should be able just to I'm pretty sure I could, when I was preparing, just recite my job talk without slides, no problem, and so you'll do that at the end of the day. But it's just like any other talk, it's like 45 minutes. Don't go over time. Everyone wants to get out of there. No one wants to hear you ramble on. Time it for 45 minutes. Make sure you do it in 45 minutes. As interesting as your research is, it's probably not more than 45 minutes worth of interesting. So just do it. And then after that, they'll take you out to dinner, and that's, you're still being interviewed, so, don't get wasted, but, it's a little funner, you could let loose a little bit.
Yeah, I'll say, so at least here, actually the talk is at noon, and then you'll have lunch with us afterwards. So it's thankfully not the end of the day. They sort of switch to do it. Some places are switching, or maybe not. Josh has more recent experience than me now, but at least when I was interviewing, some places were saying we wanted to do this earlier in the day so that people weren't just completely worn out at the end. Yeah. So at least if you interview with us, then it'll be a little earlier in the day, which is kind of nice because you can get it over with. But yeah, so that presentation of your job talk is super important. Like people even complain sort of that we put way too much emphasis on that, and it's probably true, but unfortunately that's the reality. Is there's going to be people are making their decisions based on your job talk. Like they're making their decisions like not just on the research content itself, like that's sort of established that if you're already here, like it's probably interesting work, but they're looking at your presentation abilities because that's a surrogate for your teaching abilities. They're looking at your ability to answer questions. That's, sort of a surrogate for like your ability to think as people are, asking you things or think on your feet. And then looking at your ability to convey this information. So having a good talk is actually very important, and having a good talk is really going to put you above other people in their mind. So like, I know, for instance, like when I was talking with other faculty and we were talking about different candidates, the first thing comes up was, oh, that person had a really good talk. That person had a really good talk. Or it was, oh, that was super awkward. I just wanted to get out of there. So that'll happen if you can't answer questions. Like that's kind of what they're looking for. And that's actually why you'll get probably even more questions than you would normally get for a talk. Especially very detailed ones where people are going to challenge like your assumptions. They're going to challenge what you did. And like, they might even imply like what you did is wrong, but so you need to be prepared to do that. And the best way you can do that is by giving mock presentations with your advisor, and hopefully at least with like a member of your committee or so, and have them, sort of grill you on all the different things that could come up. So the more you've done this, the better you will be prepared. It was clear when I was watching these, like who like was ready to answer questions, like who was ready to give a good presentation, and who was just sort of winged it a little bit. But yeah, it's really important, but actually that's the thing you can way over prepare for, and it'll help you a lot.
I think one thing I do want to, and just don't take anything personally. People aren't like trying to insult you, you know, they're just take it as constructive. I mean, like all the questions I got, you know, just, you know, something they're good points, you know, and like if you don't like, don't be like, if someone says this and maybe they're right, you know, and just be like, yeah, it's a good idea. We'll, you know, think about including that or think of that for future research. Like you don't need to be like, no, that's an awful, like that's like the worst response you could have.
Yeah.
So,
You don't want to do that because that person's voting on whether they want you to come or not. And they think that, you know, one, that you're wrong, but two, you can't even accept that you're wrong. Then like, that's going to, you're getting a very low grade at that point.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we have to move on to the next topic.
Okay,
now.
I think one thing I want to say about interviewing is you're interviewing as a colleague, so don't go there like a graduate student, right? Don't be like, oh, you know, Dr. Harris, you know, just Trevor, you know, like you're there as a colleague, you're there to show that you're a colleague, you're not anyone's graduate student anymore, and that you need to have that mindset. I think goes a long way when you're doing these interviews. Right, you're trying to show that you're an assistant professor, right? So it's important to have that mindset. Okay.
That's absolutely true. Yes, move on.
So after the interview, so you got some offers. So first, how many places did you apply and how many offers did you get? So
I'll let Josh sort of start with this one because I applied in a weird year where there was only maybe like 25 places total that were offering positions. And I applied to all of them and got accepted to a few, but it's sort of a rolling basis. But I think Josh should maybe field this one first and I'll add stuff at the end since he has probably a more typical experience.
Sure. So my year was essentially the opposite of Trevor's, where there was a lot of jobs and not as many candidates, you know, I'd say. So I applied to I was not very selective. So you have to think about, you know, where you want to go. But I applied to maybe 107, I think was the final Excel suite job. So I applied to a lot. Now,
7 academic jobs.
academic jobs. Yeah. I was not selective. If there was a job out there that I would have a possibility of accepting, you know, I applied to it, you know. All in the US. Yeah, I only applied to jobs in the US and I only applied to like tenure track jobs, right? I didn't apply to any teaching jobs or I applied to a few postdocs. But yeah, no, they were all tenure track research type jobs. And so there was a lot out there. And like, you know, for example, I applied to math and stat departments, I applied to stat departments, I applied to business schools. Out of all of those, I don't know how many I got phone screens on it. I mean, a decent amount, you know, I got phone screens. I don't know the exact number. I mean, like the ones that I would say the ones that I was qualified for, I mostly got screens. Like, for example, you know, I think, let's think. The best department I probably got a screen with was maybe Ohio State. Yeah, I mean, you know, I can't remember, but I could tell you this. Starting in end of October until February, I basically had an interview every other day, if not every day, right? Of something. So there was a decent amount of phone screens. As far as interviews, maybe 10 departments or so. You know, I think I got interviews with, but I think one thing you got to remember, especially, is that eventually you'll get to the point where you'll get offers. And once you get offers and you accept a job, then you have to start declining people, right? So like, this isn't like graduate school where like, oh, I need to make a decision by April 15th. Once you make your decision, you're out of the pool, right? So like, you know, and Trevor can talk about it later, but he got a pretty early acceptance, so he was out of the pool pretty fast. You know what I mean? So, but that's actually an important thing. You want to be able to convert an interview to an offer. And I want to say from all the final round interviews I had, I want to say, you know, maybe half of them I was extended offers. You know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know. The point is it depends, like this is a part that's dependent on you. Like if you don't want to move to Wyoming, don't apply to the University of Wyoming, right? Because you're going to end up in Wyoming, right?
Mhm.
So, but yeah, so like if you're going to be selective, you're going to be selective. I was not selective, so that meant I applied to a lot of places. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Quick question.
Uh,
So it definitely differs from person to person, but what was your criteria to making decisions? So asking this, definitely the city that the university is in, their state, maybe your family
Yeah.
region,
So my
all the matter,
cutoff.
but one more important thing I want to add.
Yeah.
So is the departments like focus on some specific research areas, or how do they offer you to for a tenure after 5 years, 6 years?
Mhm.
How much that mattered for you? I mean, how do they differ by department to department also?
So not all the stuff you're going to know, like part of this you'll get when you're interviewing, right? These are questions I asked about the tenure process at the places. Not everyone has a posting, or you'd have to find their document somewhere. But my selection criteria was essentially, did they have a PhD program and was it a tenure track position? If the answer was yes, I usually applied. The only exceptions were places like, I would want to live, for example. I applied to some schools in North Carolina that, didn't have any PhD, were just masters, but I would be okay because it was in North Carolina. So that was the one time I made the exception. But my hard cutoff was essentially, was a tenure track assistant professor position, was a PhD program. And there was a few places, for example, as I mentioned, like I didn't want to live in Wyoming, so I didn't apply to like those places. But besides that, yeah, pretty wide. My approach was a pretty wide net. Yeah.
That is the recommended approach, by the way, is just apply to literally everything that you would even remotely consider. Because even if you don't end up going there, you can interview and practice, and you'll do better on the interviews you wanna do.
Yeah, I was actually very happy. The first on-site interview I had was with UT Dallas, and I mean they're a fine school, but they definitely weren't my top choice. And I was glad I interviewed there first to get like a dry run,
Right.
But I mean, like, don't get me wrong, like don't I mean, this is up to you, but they tell you don't interview at a place, like don't let them fly you down there if you're never going to accept it. I mean, I'll let your morals do that, but like, it was nice to have some interviews at places that were like not, Texas A&M or whatever, these top departments first to get a feel for them and get more comfortable too.
Right. It's really helpful, actually. You'll get better each time you do the interviews.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And eventually you'll just, I mean, that's the thing, eventually you'll do so many of them that you'll just have your canned answer. Like, as I said, I might've been scared to be like, get your like, elevator speech down, but you'll do this so many times, you'll develop one pretty easily, after a while.
So as for salary negotiation, it's a point on here. I don't know what Josh's experience was, but I know A&M will not negotiate that salary. So I think that a lot of places sort of have like the package they have, since that's sort of what's been approved by the college. So it's a little bit hard to change some of that. Where you can have a little more success here, though, is trying to change some of the perks. So like they'll usually give you some amount of startup funding. So sometimes you can ask for more startup funding, or you can ask to have it extended for longer periods of time, or you can ask for, different ways of being paid for your moving expenses, things like this. So usually I feel like with the salary, that's a little hard to budge, but the sort of the other benefits can be, you can work with a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe Josh can say, because
I went through 3 negotiations.
Mhm.
And only one of them allowed me to negotiate salary.
Okay.
So, for example, Baruch, which was a business school, the salary was non-negotiable. They actually had barely any negotiation. So it really depends on the university. Baruch College had barely any negotiation. Like they just wouldn't really budge anything, which kind of rubbed me the wrong way, to tell you the truth. The University of Missouri was another place I negotiated. They were open to a salary negotiation. So they allowed me to negotiate salary just a little bit, like you gotta understand, like there's usually a kind of like a window of salaries they're allowed to give people. And also you're not going to be able to get a salary like above an associate professor or other people that have joined. So it's really a small amount of wiggle room, but they had just a little bit. And then Florida State had none. It was literally in my offer letter, this is a non-negotiable item, here's your salary, take
Yeah.
it or leave it. So that was just straight up in the offer letter. You cannot negotiate the salary.
I think
as Trevor
A&M
said-
does something like that. Huh?
Oh no. Yeah.
I was
So
gonna
I was
say-
just gonna say,
All right, you go.
I was just going to say, as Trevor said, that, but the other things I did negotiate, one thing that was very easy to negotiate was computing resources. So extra money for computing was very easy to negotiate for. It helped at Florida State. I was hired specifically for like data science and computing, right? So I could leverage that to get some more computing resources. The other thing was travel budget. Right. So you'll have, this is all part of your starter package. Part of it is how much money to spend for like conference travel. I was able to justify a little bit more because it was a little low. And then other things is, and for, other things are summer salaries, a possibility that's a little harder to negotiate. Because again, it's just like your graduate stipend, you only paid for 9 months, right? So for the first few years, you could try to get some summer salary before you get grants is another thing. Money for graduate students, that one's a little hard to negotiate because it's a decent package. But I'm just trying to think just things on the docket that you should at least try. Moving budget, as you mentioned, is a good one. And you got to do it then, because once you sign it, like you're done with negotiations, right? You can't get any more. They've hired you. Well, that's your time. So make sure you, like, usually the way it would work, right? Usually you'd have a call with the chair of the department, right? And you'd start out the call trying to get a feel of what was negotiable or not. So I'd usually start with salary. If I didn't know salary, I'd be like, I'd try to figure out if salary was negotiable. If that wasn't negotiable, I'd move on to the next item. For me, that was usually some computing money. Well, for Florida State, the first thing was actually travel money because that was too low. And then moving on to compute and so on and so forth. Right.
Sorry to interrupt again, but I think we are out of
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So I will just start the Q&A session. So we can have like 5 minutes of Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
So what went really well in Florida State? Like when did you have the feeling that maybe?
So that's the thing is like,
Josh, sorry, you do not repeat the question.
oh yeah. So just Automitra asked what went well in the Florida State interview. And I'll say like, usually with maybe one exception, actually with the exception of my initial screening interview for Florida State, for most places, I felt like if I felt it did well, it usually did. You'll get a feel for like, if people liked you, were you connecting with people, like usually you could tell like if like it got to the point where your questions and no one's really engaging with you, that's usually a bad sign. It's not always, but usually you could get a feel like, do you feel like you're being treated like a colleague right now, or are they just trying to move on? So for Florida State, I just felt like that was actually, I love their interview format. It was actually a shorter day. They basically had it broken up instead of one-on-one meetings. This was remote. They was just kind of like, I met with assistant professors, associate professors, I think, full professors, the search committee. So kind of in blocks. And I think that helped some of the conversations, because sometimes you'll talk to people who are just quiet, and that is, that's a good time. It's a time for you to talk, but like this helped kind of liven the room. And that's actually, I should mention, this is one thing you should really keep focusing on during this interview, is people's ranks, who's assistant, who's associate, because their questions are different. If they're assistant professors, you're going to talk a little bit more about being a junior faculty. How do they treat junior faculty? What do you think about the tenure expectations? Associate, especially if they recently were granted associate, they will know like what the tenure packet was, because they literally just went through it. So that's usually a good thing to talk about, right, with them. And then who's full is going to talk about differently. And then I'll say the job talk went really well with Florida State too. Like, for example, one place I didn't get an offer then I interviewed with Huiqin, and that one I had right after Thanksgiving break, and I had basically forgotten some of my job talk and tried to re-remember it like a day before, and so my job talk was definitely a little rocky for them, and they did not give me an offer, right? So yeah, it's hard to say. These are very different than industry interviews. They're very much like kind of one-on-one. You're kind of, it's very, I know it's very friendly, you know, like
Mhm.
you're just trying to say like, do you click with these people? Can you guys talk about, you know, maybe some research if you have some connections? And that one we seem to click well, if that makes sense, you know.
That's a really big component, because the presumption is that if you're already there interviewing, then you probably are capable of doing these things. Now they're gonna sort of that you can change your mind on the job talk a little bit, but usually for the one-on-ones, like you really you need to be able to carry the conversation. So most interviews that I did, you know, and then also have now participated in is you sit into the room and then they say, do you have any questions for us? And so you need to be prepared to talk and you need to be prepared to carry the conversation.
And to be clear, sometimes they'll start that they won't ask you anything. You'll just sit down and they'll be like, do you have any questions?
That's how most of them go.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is think about things you want to ask beforehand. So for junior faculty, like what sort of mentoring support is there? You know, what is the tenure process like? How much resources do you get? You know, how do you like living here is another one as well. You can ask what people like about the department, what they don't like about the department. Like you really want to show that you're actually interested in like coming there because they really want to know if they offer you something, like, are you going to take it or not? And you want to know these things too. Like you also one thing you wanted to find out about is about the teaching load. So you'll get familiar with things like 1-2 or 2-2, things like that. So that's basically how many courses you have to teach every year. So with like a 1-1, that means you'll teach one course in the fall, one course in the spring. But like a 2-1 means you have to teach 2 courses one semester, one course another semester. You want that number to be as low as possible. And sometimes this is something you can negotiate. You can even, in some places, we'll get it down to like, 1-0. So you're teaching just one course. But you need to be on the lookout for that as well. So if it's a very high teaching load, basically the higher those numbers, like the harder it's going to be for you to do any research or recruit students because you'll be spending a lot of time on running a class. And I can tell you now that like running even one class takes quite a while.
Well, I know one question I got a decent amount was like, if you were going to develop a course, like what would you like to develop, right?
Right.
You know, and that's just and usually they're asking because like they know what you research and there's something deficient in their course offerings that they know you'd be good for. So you should be able to recognize that. Like obviously, like I mean, like it helped that I knew, for example, my recommendation letter said I was one of the best computational statisticians that my advisors have had. So like I focused on my computational stat knowledge, you know what I mean, and developing courses and networks and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a common question they'll ask you, and you could ask specifically like, will I have time to do it pre-tenure to develop a course? But that could be a good or bad, right? Because it takes time to develop a course, you know.
I think we have run out of time, so we have to end the session here. So let's thank our speakers again. Thank you, Trevor, for joining us remotely from Texas.
Oh yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I do want to just reiterate again, I think 2 good resources if you're interested are this Graduate Colleges Academic Job Workshop, very useful. And then also NISS, NISS has every year this kind of panel, I forgot it was of like colleges who have job openings that they give. That's held in August, and you should look out for that too. Those are 2 very good things to attend.
And one more thing, so if you share your CV with me, I can just put it on the box folder where everyone can access it. So
if you just go to my website, it's on there.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll just share the link.
joshloyal.github.io, you know.
Okay, that works. Okay, thank you. So,
Great. Thanks everyone. If you have any follow-up questions, you can email me and I'll try to respond as fast as possible.
Yeah, and if you're applying too, like, feel free to email me if you want to see some of the documents I put together for ideas. Be careful not to like use them like it needs to be your own. Like I actually did a problem asking for Trevor's and then being like basing it a little too often and having to change it completely because I'm like, this isn't right at all. So be a little careful with that. But if you want them, I can share.
okay. So next up we have Yangfan and Huiqin. They are going to industry. Yangfan is going to 2 Sigma and Huiqin is going to Meta. So they'll talk about their job search experience in industry. I think you can please. let's have a round of applause for our speakers. Okay, so we have similar questions here as well. So we'll start with job postings. So how did you come across the job listings?
So I think one of the biggest difference with the academic job research is here we have many internship opportunities, and based on my sample, from my sample around me, I think more than half of the full-time job is from the internship return. So I think it's important to also looking for the internship opportunities. So throughout this presentation, I think I will discuss the job finding for both internship and full-time. I think most of them share the same process. And as for finding a job, I think it's a main difference from the full-time is that in industry, we have so many jobs. So I think we cannot just go to each company's website. So I think it would be helpful to use some job search portal. I think the two that I use most frequently is the Handshake and also the LinkedIn. I think you can find most of the jobs on these two websites. And I think with Handshake, you can just log in with your university account. And actually, I think it will also contain most job descriptions. And occasionally there are some jobs that are not posted on Handshake, but they are posted on LinkedIn. So you can just combine both of them. And something.
So for me, I think there are usually three ways of looking for the job. And first, you can apply them by yourself through their website. So for the most companies, they will have their website for job application. And I usually find these jobs internships through LinkedIn. And if you click the apply, it will direct you to their company website. And second way is that you can ask for referral. That you can ask for some friends that have been in that company. And if you apply jobs through referral, it will have a greater probability of success. And also I found that which is not applicable for us, because of the pandemic, is the job seminar. And I think I missed the job seminar in my when I was looking for the internship. And on the Granger, I think it was from they are for some departments like the EE and say computer science, but this job seminar is targeted to their majors, but you may also find some opportunities there. But I missed that opportunity in that year, but I will recommend you to apply for that job seminar to look for some possible positions. And for the job search portal, I did my job search mostly on LinkedIn. And you can also find maybe some HR will reach out to you through the LinkedIn Messenger, and you can chat with them to see if there's any chance. And also I used Handshake, but not much. And so for me, I think the most common way is the LinkedIn and referral. If you need any referral formatter, you can ask me.
That would be great. So
yeah.
I have a quick question. So how do you make connections for referrals?
Just someone you knew and someone your friends knew. Yeah, just looking for some helpful resources as much as you can,
Yeah.
So any weak link will also work.
Yeah, that could also be a way, if you just look at LinkedIn and find some people who work there, and you try to connect them with LinkedIn. I think occasionally you can find some good people who are willing to refer you, but I think most refer will come from your friends or friends of your friend.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there any question from this topic? Then I'll just move on to the next. So how to apply and which documents do you need? So do you need resume, and do you need letter of intent or cover letter? So what are the documents do you need?
So for the industry job hunting, there will be some complicated materials you need to prepare. I just prepared my resume, and for me, my resume are only composed like your personal experiences, like your education history, and I also include some related course of the position you are applying. So since I applied for both data scientist intern and the software engineer intern, so I prepared two versions of resume, and so they are different. So and so except for the history, education history, I also introduced some related project, the project experiences, and also I list some skills that is related to the position. So I think the most important thing about the resume is that you want to show your the people that are looking at the resume, which is usually HR, that you are suitable for this position. So you want the resume to be more related to the position you are trying to apply for. So, and one thing I learned from others is that you may want your project experience to be more detailed. So that, for example, you are saying that you had a project that maybe predicts something. And if you want it to be more impressive, you can say that how exactly the accuracy that the project attained and how much improvement your project made, so that the person when look at your resume, they will think that, yeah, you really did a good job at this. Yeah, that's all I want to share. Yeah, and there's, I think, also in some application procedure, I think they asked me like the cover letter, but I didn't to upload that one. So you're like optional. But I think it's just depend on yourself. I don't think it's very much related.
So with me, like when you did not upload that, they sometimes consider your applications, or is this something really important for them?
Oh, that's a good question. So for most of the job that I applied through the website, I think there's no response. So I think some of them are just do not require or request the cover letter, but I didn't prepare it, but I think it will be better if you prepare the cover letter.
Did you need any letters of recommendation for the application?
No, I did not need any.
And you guys applied for these positions while you were in your fourth year, right?
Oh.
For your, no, sorry.
So the fall before your graduation?
You went to internship prior to this summer, like last summer, right? Are you both returning back to the internship?
Yeah.
So I think we are like for our fourth year internship, I think we applied the internship opportunity like in the fall of our first year.
Fall semester, right?
Yeah.
So while applying, did they require you to have some publication in hand? Like when I'm going in my fourth year and if I want to apply to a big company, do I need to have some research work showing to them? Like what do I need to have to be a good candidate for them?
I don't think the publication is required, but for your CV, you have to like list the projects you are working on. For example, what I did in my CV is I wrote like 3 different projects and I tried to describe what I have been working during my PhD career. And also there is a section in the CV, I list some of the papers. Even if I have not finished writing them, I can just write the name of my paper and say manuscript, or even submit it if it's already done.
And you are going to like Meta and you are going to an investment company.
Mm-hmm.
What are the different expectations? So both of them are kind of from a different industry.
Mm-hmm.
What are the expectations? So my perception is that you should be really a good machine learning like programmer for a Meta or someone who can implement the learning methods very easily, whatever that they want to. And you probably do need some finance knowledge as well. This is my expectation. What else they ask you to know when you're applying to different jobs? And if you apply to any other industry, what is the expectation for the other ones?
I think that's a good point. Actually, I want to mention that during the interview, but I can just mention here. Actually, that's something that people may be confused about. Like for us, statistics PhD, if we want to apply for a finance job, actually usually they don't have any expectation on our knowledge of finance. So when you write CV, I don't think you need to mention anything about the finance, but actually I would say the CV is quite similar to what you will write for a tech company. Basically, what I did is to list a skill of some machine learning models I know, and also some like programming language, for example, the Python, R, or C++, and also some machine learning models. But as an add-up point to what Huiqin just talked about, so when you make your CV, you have to make sure that you understand every single word you write on your CV. For example, if you write CNN, then you should assume that the interviewee will ask you, the interviewer will ask you some question about CV, about CNN. So you cannot say that I'm not that familiar with CNN. Yeah. So I think like even for finance job nowadays, because you are a study PhD, so some job that might be related to you is working on some machine learning models in finance. So it will be helpful if you add those machine learning models to your CV. But if you think you are already familiar with some finance related topics, you can also add that to your CV. But my point is that for the interview, there's no expectation on your knowledge of finance. But of course, it's always a bonus if you have some knowledge, and you can show it off during the interview process.
So in these companies, like the kind of job they want us to do, computer science people are much better at it than us.
Mm-hmm.
So why would they hire us?
Actually, I don't agree with that point, because I have to say that in terms of the hard coding, of course, computer science are much better than us. But in terms of machine learning, I think we have better statistical understanding of those concepts. Yeah, because in finance, we don't usually do that kind of deep learning stuff. Like in that case, the people who can tune parameters better fit the job better. But in finance, I think sometimes we require a very good interpretation of the models. So in that case, I think our statistical PhD has an advantage over the computation PhD.
So for Meta, I work as a software engineer. So I think there will be a little bit different for the application and interview procedure and the internship. So for the application, I think I depend most on the lead code. If you ever heard of that website, it's a website for doing the practice your programming. So when I did some questions on that website and I practiced the Python programming skills, and also will learn some algorithms through the doing on these problem. So and in the internship, we were asked to solve some machine learning problem because our position is focused on the machine learning projects. So in the real internship, I did something like the real coding and using some API, and also you need to know something about SQL. So, but for the application and interview, I think you may need to get prepared for your coding, like knowing about the different algorithms, what are the complexity, time complexity, and the memory cost of your algorithm. And you need to also tell your interviewer that how does your code works, and what is your thought behind this coding. And also you also need to do analysis on your code. So I think regarding the interview, maybe you can take some time to do the problems on the code. And that is for software engineer. And as for the data scientist intern, you may need to get prepared for many different aspects, like the probability questions and the SQL. And also for some data scientist job positions, you may also have some product sense, like give you a real business scenario. They may ask you that you need to do some analysis based on the background. And I was not good at that. So I first applied for data scientist role in Meta, and I was rejected in the product sense round. So if you are interested in the more like A/B testing and product analysis target focus the data science role, you may have to like prepare something about the business analysis. And that's all I think I can remember.
So yeah, maybe I can.
I think Josh is.
Okay, sure.
So the next topic is interview process.
Yeah, maybe I can start with the interview in finance because I think the overall process is similar to tech companies, but there are some differences. So usually for the for the finance interview, usually we have like 2 to 4 rounds of phone interview, and if you pass all the rounds, you can go to the on-site interview. And usually the on-site interview can be like for the whole 1 day. And if you interview with some companies that are made up of many small teams, and each team might interview you separately, so you can even interview for more than 1 day. So I think during my 4th year interview, I think at that time all the interview process is remote. So actually that's a good thing for me. So you don't have to fly to all different companies. So and after you will usually be tired, which may affect your interview. And actually, like I remember one of my friends who interviewed with Tower Research before, for example, because there are 3 different teams that are interested in him. So he interviewed with 3 separate teams. Like each team interviewed him for 4 to 5 rounds. So he interviewed for like 1.5 days, and he finally get exhausted and he cannot answer any single question. So of course he get messed up. But I am lucky because I interview every company remotely. So even for the tower, when I interview with different teams, I can just separate it into many different days. So in terms of the interview question, I think for the phone interview, usually you will be talking about your research, but I don't think that's important. Basically, you just show that you are a PhD and you are doing your research correctly. And there will also be some math or probability or stat questions, and you should be prepared for that part as well. And during the on-site interview, there will be also the math and the statistical question, but there will also be, usually will be 1 round of coding part, which is similar to tech company. And I think you can also practice those coding questions using the lead code. But I think the main difference with interviewing a tech company is that for the coding part in a finance company, usually will be based on algorithm, not based on, it will not be focused on like data structure. For example, I think the most often asked question in finance is some question like dynamic programming related. So it will not ask you about like write a heap or write a stack, something like that. But you should also be familiar with all different data structure, because sometimes you will use them to optimize your coding.
For me, I did all my interviews remotely because of the COVID pandemic at that year. So I think the priority of the remote interview is that it's very convenient. You don't have to fly to the destination, and but the disadvantage is that you don't have free lunch. So yeah, yeah. But for one company, they give me gift card for lunch. That's like some compensation, and I don't know, things will may be different this year. So maybe there will be some in-person interviews, like in the job hunting for 2022. So maybe you need also go to on-site interview as a last round. And for the formula of the interview, that this will be different from company to company, since I did the interview for both data science intern and software engineer intern. So I think some of them like Meta, they just do the coding interview, and after that there will be team match to like you interview with different teams, and they will be like two-sided decision, so that you can match with appropriate team that you can work with. And for some other like data scientist roles I applied, some of them may have a 1 day different rounds of interview that you interview with different teams, and they will see that if you are suitable for as their colleague. And like also there were some, but for data scientists, I think most of the cases that you will first have some coding interview like Python and SQL. SQL is also important for the data scientist, and because you will need to like retrieve data from the database. So they may ask about your skills in SQL, and also that's the first round for coding. And also you may have some like more detailed communication with the people in the team in the next round, the second round. And that is an example, but I will say that I think the formulas of the interviews are very different from my experience. And basically in presentation, I because of I did all my interviews remotely, so I didn't like have ever encountered this situation.
Well, actually, I have one thing to add. So during each round of interview, for both like phone interview and on-site interview, usually in the beginning, maybe the interviewer will ask you like, why do you choose our company, or how do you learn our company, or why are you interested in our company? So I think even if you are not that interested in that company, you should at least do some basic preparation. Like you should know what the company is. For example, in finance, we have like investment banks, we have mutual fund, we have hedge fund, we also have private trading company. You should at least know what this company is. Like I remember like one time my friend interviewed with Jane Street, and he said Jane Street is a great hedge fund, and it's very embarrassing because Jane Street is not a hedge fund, it's a private trading company. So I don't really think it can affect your interview, but at least I think it will affect the opinion of your interviewer. So, and also in the end of your interview, usually the interviewer will ask you, do you have any question? I think the same as Trevor's answer, you should always ask a question. Don't say, I don't have any question. Yeah. So is there any question from the audience?
What were your questions?
Maybe you can just ask, for example, like what you are what's your job doing like every day? What are your research on? And also you may even ask like, what's your performance as a finance company? So that's something you are interested in. Like even if that's confidential, like the interviewer can answer you in a non-confidential way.
Yeah, I agree with Yangfan. I think it's important to prepare some questions before you interview with the employee.
So all of this that you mentioned is for your internship interview or the main interview?
We don't have main interview because both of us or first apply for the internship and then get the return.
So while returning with the interview again?
Oh, no.
So all of this was just for internship?
But I think for all I mentioned, they also apply to full-time interview.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. The only difference, at least in finance area, the only difference between like the full-time and internship interview is that for the full-time interview, maybe sometimes the interviewer will also consider like how you match with their team. But for internship interview, because for many companies, they will interview you as a pool, and then they will match all the accepted interviewee with different teams. So that's separate process. So they don't care that much about how you match with different teams.
So just move on to the next topic then.
Mhm.
So just on offers. So how many places did you apply and how many offers you got, just to get some idea? So
So I actually did not have any restrictions on the places. So from among all of the job I applied for, there were different places like Chicago and California and even New York and Boston. So because I hope to find a job, so there's no way that I can pick the places as long as I can get a appropriate job. So and oh, how many offers did you get? I
How
got
many places did you apply for?
yeah, I applied for many places. Like I remember I applied for like over 30 or 40 positions through LinkedIn or the referral, but most of them there's no response. But more one more job you apply, the more probability you will get some response, more reach out. So for the offers, I only got 2 offers. And first is for data scientist role, and another is for the software engineer and intern. So it's tricky because sometimes you got one offer and then you don't know the result for the other interviews. So you may need to push the person that is in contact with you, maybe HR, you want to push them that so that they know that you are hurry about the results. So and you may want to also accelerate your interview procedure if you had an offer in your hand. And also, if you decide that you will not accept this offer, you will need to explain to your HR that you may need to be more sincere as possible. And also, don't tell them that I don't like your companies. Just say that it's just my personal reason. For some reason, I can't accept your offer, and it's really grateful that he will give you this offer, but it's it's not. I have to find some reason that I don't accept it. And for the salary negotiation, since this only happens in the full-time return offers, so I think for this. I don't have too much salary negotiation because for us, if your performance is not much over the average level, there won't be too much spaces for the salary negotiation. But I think you can try it. Just do your best to like negotiate with your HR in an appropriate way, just to be more gentle and to be more convincing.
I have a question. So feel free to do not answer my question. John, I just want to have a comparison for the salaries of the academic and industry. Definitely, feel free to do not answer that. But if you want to just give us a range of the offers that you got in salary, I want a comparison of that. But as I said, feel free to do not answer that.
I will mention, even if the growth in industry is much more than it is. So I'll tell you what Florida State offers. Right? But it's not going to change much from that. I have a friend in industry who's been working in we started at like 70K. So like you gotta keep that in mind.
So basically in academic, you're expecting like this goes to 150.
Let me put it this way. You could actually, on the ASA, I should have mentioned, they have the median salary of.
Oh, yeah.
So the ASA publishes every 2 years the median salaries of like assistant professors and stuff like that. So if you want to know what you should be making, you could go there. It absolutely depends on like the school.
就说太难，这个
But the
没错
median。 salary for like a starting assistant professor, roughly from like, let's say like 100K. That's kind of what they. And it goes up. And actually, you want to know how much your advisor makes, it's posted publicly, so you could also find out how. Yeah.
Comfortable sharing that experience.
For tech company, I think for software engineer, I got offer like around 200,000, between 2,000. Sorry, between 200,000, right? And yeah, and $300,000 each year. and it will consist of like the base salary and the stock, the equality, and also some bonus. Yeah, these three parts, and this will, and your stock may not be refreshed after like 4 years. So this might not be the might be the highest salary in the first maybe several years. Oh, and I forgot to mention there will also be sign on fee.
Yeah, I assume the salary in tech company will be comparable to, for example, the pay in business school, right? I assume.
No, I'll mention the salary for Baruch, which is in New York City.
Uh-huh.
Their salary was
Already, I thought.
If you want to make money, don't become the assistant. You'll make enough, but you're not going to be making that money.
Yeah, I think for finance for me, the actually is quite, I don't know how to say, but basically it's quite separate. Like for the tier one companies, usually the salary can be between 300 and 400, or even higher if you have some particular performance. But if it's not tier one company, it can be even lower than the tech companies. So I think it depends.
Any other questions? I think we're at the end of the session, so we'll just take questions from audience. So I have a question. So, if someone didn't do any internship, then how's the chance of getting an industry job? Like, what do they need to do extra to get an offer?
That's a good point. Actually, I think it's always helpful to at least one internship during your first year if you have interest in industry. It also helps you to know what industry is doing. But if you somehow miss that opportunity, I think the extra effort is, of course, you have to perform better during the interview to make up that gap you have. And also, I think maybe you should try to learn more about industry by yourself, because you missed the opportunity to learn it during your internship. So you have to somehow get the knowledge of what industry is doing in some other way. Yeah.
When you were getting ready for your internship, how much time per week, like during the academic year, did you say you were working on skills to apply for the
Actually missed the question. Can you say that again? Sorry.
While maintaining your other responsibilities, how much time per week would you spend building skills? Yeah.
So also asked, so how much time do you need to spend on your application process when the
building skills?
Yes. So during the full term, when the school is going on, how much time do you have to spend per week for your application skill building process?
Yeah, I think that's also a thing I want to mention. So as a PhD, I think our first job is, of course, to focus on our research and graduate as a PhD. So based on that, what I did is usually I think the most time-consuming preparation is about the coding part. So what I did is just use my free time. Like after I finish my research, I feel like I need a break. I just use the lead code as a way to to refresh myself. Because I think overall the lead code is of course easier than your research. So that's what I did. So usually maybe like I would say less than 1 hour a day. But maybe before your interview, you want to spend some more time to just quickly go over all your practice questions in lead code. At that time, maybe you want to spend some more time. But overall, I will not spend too much time on preparing for your interview.
Yeah, for me, I think it's also important to balance your research and your job hunting. So for me, for me, so since I applied for a software engineer, so I did most of my time to practice programming algorithms on LeetCode. So may like spend, I may like do some like two to three problems on LeetCode each day. Like before the interview season, before the job hunting season. So, and also since if you want to apply for data scientist, you may also need to take some time to like reviewing your statistics knowledge. And I think you won't have to like devote all your time to like do job research, just to do your research, do the job hunting. So just to do the research first and then use the remaining time to applying for your preparation. In my internship experience, I think most time you will do coding, and also you will need to have many meetings, and that will be different from your PhD study. You will have to attend many meetings in your team with your mentor, and also in a maybe larger group. And you need also, and in our internship, we need to evaluate your performance in different axes. Like your independency, your production, and your communication. And I think communication is also a very important aspect, especially for international students. You'd like to make your job to be presented in a larger group to be more visible to others. And so, and for me, I think also, you may have to like do the most of the time to do coding, and we need to also communicate with the other employees, maybe from other departments, about the job you're working on, the project you are working on. Also, you may have to do some presentation to summarize your job, your progress, and something like that.
We're running out of time, so we have to end the session here. So let's thank our speakers.
Yeah, if you have any question, you can